Hey guys, Pastor Mike here. Thank you for joining me. This Sunday, you're going to have the opportunity to bless a single mom family. I believe she has 5 children, and right now she's fighting through and struggling with brain cancer. And what we're going to do together as a church is we are going to gather together gift cards, and we're going to make it a real special Christmas for this family. And so this Sunday, bring your gift cards, and we'll make that happen together. Proverbs tells us if you give to the poor, you lend to the Lord. And whatever you lend to the Lord will repay. And so this is an excellent opportunity to bless a family in need, but also to be blessed by giving this Christmas. And so I want to give you some information about a Christmas story. So often we go through the motions of Christmas, through the traditions, and yet we don't know why we do these things, why we have these traditions, but we still observe them. And so I want to give you a little bit of a Christmas story back in time to church history, and hopefully lighten up your Christmas this season. So going all the way back to the late 2nd, early 3rd century, there was quite a controversy going on in the church. There was a bishop in the city of Alexandria who was ironically named Alexander, and he taught what all Christians nowadays believe, that Jesus is co-equal with his Father in his deity, that Jesus is God the Son, eternal in his nature and perfectly excellent and majestic, that he is totally equal with his Father and yet personally distinct. We call this Trinitarian Christology. It's part and parcel of the great doctrine of the Trinity. And so Alexander taught this along with his young deacon, a man by the name of Athanasius, who trained under Alexander. Well, what ended up happening was there was a priest by the name of Arius. Arius believed that actually Jesus wasn't co-equal with his Father. He wasn't eternal, but rather that Jesus was a creature who was made by God. And the way Arius understood it was God made Jesus, and then Jesus turned around and made everything else. This is kind of what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe nowadays. We call this version of things Arianism, and we call it right after Arius. Now, Arius was disgruntled, and he goes to Alexander and he complains, and Alexander puts him on trial and says, "You're out," and kicks him out of the church for his heretical teaching. Well, what Arius does is he goes around teaching this false version of Jesus everywhere he goes. He actually happens to be a very good teacher. He's charismatic, he's a good speaker, and he persuades many people. And so around 321 AD, the emperor, who has taken over both the eastern and western kingdoms for the first time in a long time, the Roman Empire is won again, and all united under this one emperor, Constantine. And Constantine converts to Christianity and wants to keep the empire as united as it possibly can. And he believes that Christianity is the means by which he's going to accomplish that, and he also happens to believe that Christianity is true. And so what he does is he doesn't like this battle that's going on in the church between the Arians and the Trinitarians teaching the biblical Christ, Arians teaching that Jesus was a creature. And so what he does is he calls a council at the nice little town of Nicaea, and this council is specifically designed to figure out this issue once and for all. So I want to read to you a little bit of a description as to what was going on in that council. And so you remember that all the bishops were there. Not all of them. There were others. For instance, the Bishop of Rome, who the Roman Catholic Church calls the Pope, he wasn't at the Council of Nicaea because there was no Pope at that time. Historical fact. But there was a man named Nicholas. He was the bishop of the town, the city of Myra, which is in modern-day Turkey. Nicholas is otherwise known as Saint Nick or Kris Kringle or perhaps even Santa Claus. And he was there at the Council of Nicaea. He was a historical person, and this is the story of what he did. The emperor was sitting on his throne, flanked by 159 bishops to his left and 159 bishops to his right. So just picture this, the emperor of Rome there, the bishops flanking him, he's holding court, Arius was presenting his views with great vigor and detail. As St. Nicholas observed the scene, the bishops listened to Arius in complete silence and without interrupting his discourse. Outraged and prompted by his saintly vigor, he left his seat, walked up to Arius, and smacked him squarely in the face. This is a fascinating occurrence where this bishop of the church in Myra is so fed up with the false teaching of Arius that he gets up, goes to him in front of the emperor and all the bishops, and slaps him one because he had it coming. Well, what ends up happening is St. Nick gets arrested for assaulting a bishop, and he's thrown in jail, and eventually he's released. More importantly, Alexander, the bishop of Alexandria, argues very persuasively the truth that Jesus is both God and man, that he's God the Son incarnate, and that he's equal with his Father. And this Trinitarian doctrine wins the day at the Council of Nicaea, and subsequently the Nicene Creed was produced. The Creed of Nicaea, the creed that was produced in 325. There's a later creed called the Nicene Constantinople Creed, which is produced in 381. Oftentimes when we refer to the Nicene Creed, we refer to the one that was written in 381, but the original was in 325. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes in that regard, and you'll be able to look at the Nicene Creed. It's something that Christians still today affirm and hold to. Our church in our bylaws and constitution affirms the Nicene Creed. Well, one more thing in this story, a couple of fascinating little turns. What ends up happening is, even though the Trinitarians win the day at the Council of Nicaea, Arius still goes out and spreads his false teaching far and wide, and eventually the vast majority of the empire believes his teaching. And so now you've got this small portion of the empire headed up by none other than Athanasius, Alexander's former deacon, who has now been promoted to bishop at the passing of Alexander. And so now Athanasius has taken the torch from his forebearer Alexander, and he is now the champion of the Trinitarian doctrine. And what happens is Constantine dies, and his son Constans is put in his place as emperor, and Constans is an Arian. And so what happens is the emperor sends 5,000 troops to go to Alexandria and arrest Athanasius and put an end to this Trinitarian doctrine once and for all. Well, Athanasius is beloved by his people. He's a great preacher. He's a brilliant man. He's very faithful. He is absolutely loved by his church. And what ends up happening is, when the Roman soldiers get to his church, Athanasius is so beloved by his people. The monks in his church hide him under the robes, and to get him out the back of the church, where Athanasius gets on a boat and starts paddling down river. Now, you need to know that from the historical accounts, Athanasius was a short guy. Depending on who you read, he was very handsome, or he was a dark elf. Depends on who you read. Evidently, he was dark-skinned. He was from Egypt. But the people who loved Athanasius says he was, heavenly handsome. Others say he looks like an elf. So you choose. But anyway, what happens is Athanasius gets in this boat with a couple of his monks and begins to paddle down the river, and the Romans figure out what happened, and the soldiers get into the boat of their own, and they begin to chase after Athanasius. And so Athanasius gets the brilliant idea that he starts paddling back towards the church, and he passes by the Romans on their boat, and the Romans holler out and they say, "Have you seen Athanasius?" And Athanasius responds, "He's not far off." And they keep going, and he comes back. Well, what eventually happens is things come to a head, and Athanasius is called to another council. Well, at this point, Arius has really achieved quite a bit of fame and power in the empire. Many churches are affirming Arian doctrine, including the Church of Rome. There goes the infallibility of the Pope, by the way. What ends up happening is Athanasius he appears, comes to the city to go to this council, comes to Constantinople, and he's walking through this city to go to this council, and Arius passes by him And Arius, shocked that Athanasius didn't say anything to him, goes, "Athanasius, don't you know who I am?" And Athanasius responds, "Yes, I'd recognize the spawn of Satan anywhere." Which I think is just just sort of typical of the sort of almost Pauline gull that Athanasius has. Loved the Lord Jesus Christ, was uncompromising in his faith. I'm going to read to you a little bit of a description of Athanasius. This is a description written long after Athanasius has died by C.S. Lewis, the great Christian literary scholar and writer. C.S. Lewis says this about Athanasius. He stood for the Trinitarian doctrine whole and undefiled. When it looked as if all the civilized world was slipping back from Christianity into the religion of Arius, into one of those sensible synthetic religions which are so strongly recommended today, and which then is now included among their devotees many highly cultivated clergymen. It is to his glory that he did not move with the times. It is to his reward that he remains when those times, as all times do, have passed away. And so that's C.S. Lewis's characterization of Athanasius. One more thing. When Athanasius comes to the council, and it would seem like the whole world is against him, and there he is standing for the truth of the doctrine of the Trinity. Someone says to Athanasius, "Athanasius, can't you see that the entire world is against you?" And Athanasius responds, "Athanasius contra mundum." Athanasius against the world. So if you've heard that phrase, contra mundum, that's where that's come from. Now, in closing, I want to read to you a beautiful little meditation by an ancient church father, my very favorite church father. His name is Melito of Sardis, Bishop of Sardis. He's described as being a man full of the Holy Spirit. And this is what he says about Christmas. He says, "On these accounts he came to us," that is Jesus. "On these accounts, though he was incorporeal, he formed for himself a body after our fashion, appearing as a sheep, yet still remaining the shepherd, being esteemed as a servant, yet not renouncing the sonship, being carried in the womb of Mary, yet arrayed in the nature of his Father, treading upon the earth, yet filling heaven, appearing as an infant, yet not discarding the eternity of his nature, being invested with a body, yet not circumscribing the unmixed simplicity of his Godhead, being esteemed poor, and yet not divested of his riches, needing sustenance inasmuch as he was man, yet not ceasing to feed the whole world inasmuch as he is God, putting on the likeness of a servant, yet not impairing the likeness of his Father. He was standing before Pilate, and at the same time sitting with his Father. He was nailed upon a tree, and yet he was the Lord of all things." So I hope you have a great Christmas, and we'll see you Sunday.